I still remember that night. The night everything cracked open. The house looked beautiful, almost too beautiful. Crystal glasses lined the table, polished silverware shimmered in the warm glow of the chandelier, and the scent of roasted lamb drifted through the dining room. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. Family gathered, laughter echoing, wine glasses clinking in cheerful rhythm. At least that's what I thought. I sat at the long oak table, right between Braden, my fiancé, and his mother, Ramona. She was a woman who carried herself like she owned not just the house, but the very air inside it. Every smile of hers was a performance, every word rehearsed and sharpened. I had been told this dinner was about finalizing details before the wedding. I had imagined flowers, music, maybe even talk about the guest list. But when the servers cleared the plates and poured another round of wine, the conversation shifted. The room grew quieter, almost heavy. Ramona tapped her manicured nails against the rim of her glass before sliding a leather folder across the table toward me. Her smile was razor thin. "Sign it," she said sweetly, as if offering me dessert. "Or the wedding is off." At first I thought I had misheard her. My fork hovered in mid-air, and I glanced at Braden, expecting him to laugh, to wave it off, to reassure me. But he didn't. He didn't even meet my eyes. Instead, he stared down at his hands, silent. I whispered, "What is this?" Ramona leaned back in her chair, smug. "A prenuptial agreement. Standard. Every smart family does it." Braden's voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. "You should probably sign it," he murmured. No defense, no hesitation, no fight. The room fell silent. The chatter that had filled the air only moments before seemed to evaporate. I could feel every eye at the table on me, waiting. They thought I was cornered. They thought I was small. Inside, something snapped. I picked up the folder. My hands were steady, but my chest ached, as if someone had driven a blade into it and twisted. Ramona smirked like she had already won. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't the helpless little girl they assumed I was. I wasn't marrying into this family for money or status or security. I had built my own life long before Braden came into it. I had my own success, my own strength. And more than that, I had a plan. But in that moment, all I did was smile. I excused myself politely, heels clicking softly against the marble floor as I carried the folder with me. The guest restroom was empty, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the walls are listening. I set the folder on the counter and stared at it. For a long moment, I just stared, watching my reflection in the mirror. My face looked calm, almost serene, but my hands trembled. Finally, I opened it. Clause after clause, page after page, my stomach twisted. It wasn't just about money, it was about control. Hidden in polite legal language were rules meant to cage me. No therapy without Braden's approval. Inheritance stripped if I ever dared to leave. Clauses about fidelity, about obedience, about silence. It wasn't a contract, it was a declaration. A declaration that in their eyes I was less than, that I was disposable, that my worth was conditional. I laughed, bitter and low. Back in the dining room, they probably thought I was crying. They probably thought I was breaking. But I wasn't. Not yet. I placed my palm flat against the cold marble counter, breathing in and out until my heartbeat steadied. My mother once told me, when people try to take your dignity, you don't shout, you don't scream, you hold your ground, and you wait for your moment. I touched up my lipstick, squared my shoulders, and walked back into the lion's den. The dining room buzzed with fake conversation, but when I entered, it quieted again. Ramona's eyes tracked me like a hawk. Braden avoided looking at me altogether. I sat down, folded my napkin into a perfect daisy, just as my mother had taught me when I was a little girl, and placed it gently beside my plate. Then I smiled. Ramona raised her brow. "Well?" she asked. I tilted my head, voice calm, almost cheerful. "It's quite a document," I said. "You must have had it prepared weeks ago." Her smile faltered, just slightly. "We just want what's fair," she replied, her tone sharp beneath the sugar. Braden finally looked up, his voice timid. "It's not personal, Lev." I wanted to laugh. Not personal. This wasn't a contract, it was a weapon. But I didn't laugh, not out loud. Instead, I leaned closer and said softly, "Of course not. It's just legally binding emotional warfare, served with steak and potatoes." Braden flushed. Ramona smirked, pleased with herself, thinking she had cornered me. But they didn't see it. They didn't see the fire that had already ignited in me. They didn't see the silent vow I made in that moment. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling of the guest house, the words echoed in my head, "They underestimated you again." And I knew then, as clearly as I knew my own name, this wasn't going to be a wedding. This was going to be a war. The guest room was silent that night, but my mind was anything but. The folder lay on the desk, its leather cover catching the faint glow of the bedside lamp, like it was daring me to open it again. I had already skimmed the words once, but I couldn't stop myself. Something in me whispered, "Read it carefully. Read every word. Don't let them hide behind their sugar-coated smiles." I poured myself a glass of water, though my throat was so tight it felt like swallowing glass. I sat, opened the folder, and let the pages fall one by one beneath my fingertips. The first time, I had been too shocked to process it. The second time, I read slowly, deliberately, and that was when the weight of it began to sink in. Clause 1. If I sought therapy without Braden's approval, I would forfeit financial rights. Clause 2. If Braden were unfaithful, I must forgive once, but if I made the same mistake, everything was stripped from me. Clause 3. Any inheritance I received from my family would be absorbed into the Keller estate. Clause 4. If I ever left him, I would walk away with nothing. I stopped breathing. This wasn't protection. This wasn't fairness. This was a cage, a set of iron bars written in legal ink. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Crying would mean they won, and I wasn't ready to give them that. Instead, I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling my heart race, and whispered to myself, "They don't get to define me, not like this." But the deeper I read, the more suffocated I felt. Every clause dripped with suspicion, with contempt. It was as though Ramona had sat down with a pen and poured every ounce of her disdain for me onto these pages. And Braden, his signature was already there. Neat, careful, precise. Signed before I even saw it. That broke something in me. Not the wedding, not the money, not the rules, but him. The man I had once believed in. The man who had whispered promises to me under starlit skies. The man who swore he loved me not for what I had, but for who I was. He had signed it, silently, without question. I set the papers down and stared at the ceiling, my breath coming shallow. My body shook, not from fear, but from grief. The kind of grief that comes when you realize someone you thought was on your side never really was. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the pages apart and scatter them into the night. But instead, I did something quieter, something my mother had taught me long ago. I folded the first page into a perfect square, then the next into a triangle, then another. My hands moved automatically, a ritual of control in a world spinning out of it. By the end, I had a small, fragile paper bird resting in my palm, and I whispered, "You will not break me." The silence of the guest house pressed around me. I thought of my childhood, the nights when my mother worked 2 jobs, when people looked down on us because we had nothing. I remembered the way she would hold my hand and say, "One day, they'll underestimate you. And that's when you'll rise." She had been right. I reached for my phone, the real one, and turned it off. Then, from the hidden pocket in my purse, I pulled out the old black burner I kept just in case. Most people would call it paranoia. I called it survival. My fingers trembled as I dialed. 1 ring, 2 rings. Then a familiar voice. Tell me you're not calling me from that mansion's closet, Joanna, my lawyer, muttered. Please tell me this isn't about a prenup. I swallowed. My voice came out steadier than I felt. It's about a prenup, hand-delivered, during dinner. There was silence, then a sharp sigh. Talk to me. And so I did. I outlined every clause, every word, every insult hidden beneath the polished language. Joanna didn't interrupt, not once. She asked the right questions. I gave her the right answers. We weren't shocked, just disgusted. When I finished, there was a pause. Then her voice softened. They've underestimated you again. I closed my eyes. The tears I had been holding back finally slipped down my cheeks. Not because I was broken, but because she was right. They thought I was weak. They thought I was desperate. They thought I was climbing into their world because I needed them. But I didn't. I had climbed mountains alone. I had built something from nothing. And now they were about to learn what that meant. We hung up, and I sat in the quiet again. My heart still hurt, but something had shifted. The grief was still there, heavy and bitter, but beneath it was a spark, small but alive. I walked to the mirror, looking at myself. My reflection stared back. A woman with red-rimmed eyes, yes, but also a woman standing tall. A woman who refused to bend. I touched the paper bird on the counter. Then I touched the contract and I whispered, "If this is war, so be it." The night had stretched long, but sleep never came. I sat by the window of the guest house, staring out at the vineyard under a silver moon. My hands still trembled from the weight of betrayal, yet something inside me refused to collapse. That was when I heard a gentle knock. "Lev?" The voice was soft, careful, almost like a whisper meant not to startle. It was Nerida, Braden's cousin, the quiet one. She wasn't like the others, not polished with arrogance, not armed with judgment. She carried warmth the way others carried diamonds. I opened the door and she slipped inside, barefoot, holding 2 cups of tea. "You look like you could use this," she said simply, placing the steaming cup into my hands. The scent of chamomile rose between us, grounding, familiar. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I needed someone, anyone, to just sit beside me. We didn't speak at first. The silence was different from the suffocating silence of the dining table. This silence was safe. This silence said, "You don't have to pretend with me." Finally, Nerida looked at me, her eyes full of quiet strength. "I saw the folder," she whispered. "I saw what she did to you." My throat tightened. I had fought so hard to hold back tears, to be unshakable, but her words cracked something open. A tear slid down my cheek, and then another. "I don't understand," I whispered, my voice breaking. How could he sign it? How could he sit there and let her humiliate me? Nerida reached across and took my hand. Her touch was steady, firm. Because he doesn't know what strength looks like. He thinks silence is weakness. But I know better. I've watched you, Lev. You don't break. You bend, you breathe, and then you rise. They have no idea what kind of woman they're dealing with. Her words hit me harder than any insult Ramona had ever thrown. For the first time that night, I felt seen, truly seen. I closed my eyes, and a memory surfaced. My mother's hands folding a napkin into a daisy, her voice saying, "When people disrespect you, you show them grace, and if they push harder, you show them strength." I whispered it aloud, and Nerida smiled. "Exactly," she said, "and you're not alone, not this time." I looked at her, surprised. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Whatever you're planning, make it good, and when the moment comes, I'll be right there with you." The words warmed me more than the tea in my hands. For so long I had been bracing myself to fight this battle alone. But in that moment I realized I had an ally, someone who believed in me, someone who was willing to stand beside me when the storm hit. For the first time since that cursed folder landed on the dinner table, I smiled. Not the polite smile I gave Ramona, not the hollow smile I gave Braden, but a real one, fragile, trembling, but real. "Thank you," I whispered. Narita squeezed my hand once more before standing. "Get some rest," she said. "You'll need it. Tomorrow you begin to fight back." She slipped out of the room as quietly as she had entered, leaving me alone again. But the room no longer felt empty. The air no longer felt cold. I looked down at the little paper bird still resting on the counter, and for the first time, I didn't see fragility. I saw wings. I picked it up, held it against my chest, and whispered, "I am not alone." And with that truth, I finally let my eyes close. The morning sun spilled across the Keller estate like honey over marble, too golden, too perfect. But beneath that perfection, the cracks were widening. By the time I entered the dining room for breakfast, the table was already alive with chatter. Polite laughter, the clinking of silver spoons against porcelain cups, the rehearsed warmth of people who smiled with their mouths, but never their eyes. Ramona sat at the head of the table, commanding as always. Her gown was cream silk, her pearls gleaming under the light. She looked like a queen presiding over loyal subjects, only I wasn't her subject. Not anymore. "Sleep well, darling," she asked when she noticed me. Her smile was sharp, her tone too sweet. I matched it with one of my own. "Like a rock," I replied, pouring myself coffee. My voice was even, calm. But inside, I was replaying every word from the night before, every clause, every betrayal. Braden looked up from his notes, wedding vows he was reviewing like they were a business proposal. He smiled faintly as if nothing had happened, as if the prenup wasn't sitting between us like a loaded gun. I wanted to scream, but instead I stirred sugar into my coffee, one slow circle at a time. This was no longer breakfast. This was chess, and every move mattered. The day stretched on with rehearsals, phone calls, endless discussions about flowers and seating charts. I floated through it all with a practiced grace, never faltering, never letting them see the storm inside me. At lunch, Marjorie, the ever-loyal family friend, leaned across the table and said softly, "You must be so excited to finally be part of the Kellers. Such an honor." Her words were wrapped in silk but lined with barbed wire. I smiled politely. "Yes, almost as exciting as being underestimated." She blinked, caught off guard, before forcing a laugh. "You have quite the sense of humor." But it wasn't a joke. Not to me. That evening, the family gathered in the sitting room. The fireplace crackled, glasses of wine in hand, stories traded as though nothing ugly simmered beneath the surface. I listened quietly, sipping water instead of wine, watching them. Every word, every gesture, every slip of the tongue, I stored it away like weapons. Ramona told a story about her own wedding day, her voice lilting, eyes occasionally flicking toward me as though daring me to measure up. I nodded, smiling faintly, but said nothing. My silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And when the laughter rose again, I let my gaze drift, unhurried, until it landed on her. Our eyes locked, hers challenged, mine promised, a promise she didn't yet understand. Later, when the room had emptied, I slipped outside into the cool night air. The vineyard stretched endlessly before me, the rows of vines like soldiers standing at attention. I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air steady me. I wasn't just fighting for love anymore. This was about respect, about worth, about power. Behind me, Narita appeared again, her footsteps light on the stone. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside me, the silence between us a shield. Finally, she murmured, "They think you're playing their game." I turned to her, my voice steady. "They're wrong. I'm building my own board." She smiled faintly. "Good, because in this family, silence doesn't mean weakness. It means patience. And patience—" She paused, her eyes glinting in the moonlight. "Patience wins wars." That night, lying awake again, I realized something. They thought I was a pawn, but pawns, when pushed far enough across the board, become queens. And queens don't beg for power, they take it. The dining room shimmered with polished silver, tall candles and crystal glasses that caught the light like they were mocking me. It was supposed to be another rehearsal dinner, another polite gathering wrapped in pretense. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the air was thick, like everyone knew something was about to snap. Ramona sat at the head of the table, as regal as ever, her champagne gown glinting under the chandelier. Braden sat across from me, his eyes cast downward, avoiding mine as though silence could save him. Halfway through the main course, Ramona rose. She clinked her glass and the room hushed instantly. Her smile was sugar, her words venom. "This family is built on legacy," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "On sacrifice, on women who know their place and men who protect them. And tonight, I am grateful that tradition continues." Every eye shifted to me. Every smile was tight, expectant. I set my fork down slowly, deliberately, and folded my napkin into a daisy. My mother's words rang in my head. Show them grace, and if they push harder, show them strength. I placed the napkin flower beside my plate, lifted my glass, and stood. The silence was electric. "A woman who truly loves," I said evenly, "doesn't need to sign her dignity away to prove it." Gasps rippled around the table. Braden's head snapped up. Ramona's smile didn't falter, but her knuckles tightened around her glass. I turned to Braden, my voice sharper now. "You sat there and let her hand me a contract designed to break me, and you signed it before I even saw it." He flushed, stammering. "Lev, it's not—" I cut him off. "Not personal." "That document was a cage, Braden. A declaration that I was never your equal, that I was nothing more than a liability to be managed." The room was silent. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to hold its breath. Ramona leaned forward, her tone cutting. "Careful, darling, you're playing a dangerous game." I smiled, slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that carries a blade. "No, Ramona, you are, and you're about to lose." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded paper. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady as I laid it on the table. "I had this notarized last week," I said calmly. "A revised clause, one you didn't notice when I signed your precious contract. It states that if coercion or fraud can be proven by recordings, by witnesses, your agreement is void, entirely void, and your assets." I let the words hang in the air, sweet and sharp. "Become subject to review." Ramona's face paled, her mask slipping for the first time. Braden looked between us, confused, terrified. "You wouldn't dare," Ramona hissed. I leaned in, lowering my voice so only she could hear, though the room strained to catch every word. "You handed me that prenup like it was a weapon. You forgot that weapons can be turned." The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly, deliberately, I raised my glass. "To legacy," I said, my voice ringing clear, "but not yours. Mine." And I drank. The room erupted, not with applause, not with laughter, but with the frantic whispers of a family realizing the balance of power had shifted. Ramona sat frozen, her smile cracked, her control slipping through her fingers. Braden stared at me, wide-eyed, as if seeing me for the first time, and I, finally fully, felt free. The dining room was a battlefield of silence. The chandelier still glowed, the wine still shimmered in crystal glasses, but the air was shattered. Ramona sat frozen, her knuckles white around her glass, her lips pressed thin. Braden's fork clattered to his plate, his face pale, eyes darting between us like a child caught in a storm he didn't understand. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Marjorie, her voice trembling, whispered, "My God, what have we done?" It was the first crack, and once it came, more followed. Braden's cousin pushed back his chair, muttering something about too far. Another guest dropped her napkin, her hands shaking. The whispers grew, circling the room like smoke. I stayed standing, glass in hand, my heart pounding so loud it felt like the only sound in the world. Ramona finally found her voice. "You ungrateful." But she stopped when Nerida stood. Her voice was steady, clear. "No, Aunt Ramona, she's right. You've tried to control her, humiliate her, cage her. And Braden—" She turned to him, eyes wet with unshed tears. "You let it happen." Braden's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes were wide, wounded, but not for me, for himself. And that was when it hit me. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry he'd been exposed. A tear slipped down my cheek, hot and unrelenting. Not for him, not for us, but for the years I had believed in a man who had never believed in me. "You don't love me," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "You love the idea of me, the convenience, the silence." The words hung heavy. Braden's shoulders sagged, his mask falling. For the first time, I saw him as he truly was. Not the man I thought I'd marry, but the boy who had never learned to stand without his mother's shadow, afraid of truth, addicted to comfort. His voice broke. I just didn't want another scandal. I couldn't handle losing everything again. Again. The word hit me like ice water. This had never been about me. It had always been about him, his reputation, his comfort, his fear. And with that realization, the last fragile thread inside me snapped. I wiped my tears with steady hands and whispered, "Then you've already lost me." The room was silent, deadly, suffocating silent. Then Nerida moved toward me, her eyes brimming with tears, her voice breaking. "You don't deserve this," she whispered, her voice shaking as she took my hand. "You deserve better. You deserve love that fights for you, not against you." That was when the dam inside me finally broke. I sobbed, not the quiet, hidden tears I had shed in the bathroom, but deep, raw sobs that tore through me like thunder. And Nerida held me, her arms strong, her tears mingling with mine. Around us, the family sat stunned, the facade collapsing. For once, Ramona had no words. For once, Braden had no excuses. And for once, I didn't care. I let the grief wash over me, the grief for the love I thought I had, for the family I thought I was gaining, for the silence I had carried too long. But beneath the grief was something else, something sharp, something alive, clarity. When the sobs subsided, I lifted my head. My eyes were swollen, my face wet, but my voice was steady. "This ends here," I said. And in that moment, I wasn't broken. I wasn't weak. I was free. The morning after felt different. The estate was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. The sun had just begun to rise, casting soft light over the endless vineyard. I stood by the balcony doors, wrapped in a simple gray robe, holding a cup of tea Nerida had placed in my hands. For the first time in days, I could breathe. The laughter from last night, the whispers, the gasps, they were gone. All that remained was the echo of truth. And truth, even when it breaks you, has a way of setting you free. Ramona didn't come to breakfast. Braden sat alone at the table, flipping through a stack of notes like they were shields he could hide behind. He didn't look at me. I didn't speak to him. The silence between us said everything words could not. Afterward, I walked through the garden. Overgrown roses climbed broken trellises, their beauty wild and uncontained. I sat on an old iron bench beneath a sycamore tree, listening to the wind move gently through the leaves. For the first time in so long, I felt light. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end cracked, raw with emotion. "I heard about the wedding," she said. "My sister. The one I hadn't spoken to in years. I don't know what happened, but I'm proud of you. I should have told you that long ago. I'm sorry. I didn't. My throat closed. Tears filled my eyes again, but this time they weren't bitter. They were soft, healing. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice shaking. That's all I ever needed to hear. We didn't speak long. We didn't need to. Some words, when spoken at the right time, carry more weight than 1,000 conversations. That evening, while the family pretended normalcy, I walked barefoot across the stone patio, the cool air wrapping around me. In my hands, I held a single folded napkin shaped into a daisy, the same fold my mother had taught me years ago, the same fold I had placed on the dinner table the night they tried to break me. I stood at the edge of the patio, the vineyard stretching into the horizon, and let the napkin slip from my fingers. The wind caught it gently, carrying it away. Not soaring, not falling, just drifting free. And I whispered to the night, "I will never be small for anyone again." The words weren't for Braden. They weren't for Ramona. They weren't even for the family watching me from their shadowed windows. They were for me. Because some weddings begin a new life, mine ended a prison. And with every breath I took, I stepped further into freedom.